Good evening, everyone. I think the last few people are coming in. Hello. My name is Elizabeth East. I'm one of the directors at LA Louver Gallery. On behalf of all my colleagues at LA Louver, welcome you tonight. Before we get started, a point of order. The conversation this evening will continue for about half an hour, and after that there will be a period of questions. My lovely colleague Mimi, who is in the back, will pass the microphone around. We are recording the conversation, so if you wouldn't mind waiting until you have a microphone in hand to ask your question, that would be most appreciated. And we'll remind you of that as well at the end. Okay, so I have two guests here who really need no introduction, as the old saying goes. To my right is Shana Nys Dambrot, who is a writer. Please. Shana is a writer, art critic, and curator based in downtown Los Angeles. She's the arts editor for the LA Weekly and a contributor to numerous, and I underscore numerous, cultural publications, including Flaunt and Artillery. Shana studied art history at Vassar. She curates and juries exhibitions, writes prolifically for exhibition catalogs and monographic publications, and speaks at galleries, schools, and cultural institutions nationally as well as LA Louver. In her spare time, she picks up awards. These include the 2022 Mosaic Future Art Writers Prize, the 2022 Rabkin Prize for Art Criticism, and several awards from the LA Press Club. I think I just noticed a couple a week ago. Yeah. Okay, congratulations. So again, welcome, Shana. Congratulations also to you. Matt Wedel was born and raised in Colorado. Woohoo!
Makes me want to go
So who's
home.
from Colorado? So he started at the School of the Art Institutes of Chicago, earned his MFA from Cal State Long Beach, where he studied with Tony Marsh. Woohoo!
And Kristen Morgan, who's
and
can you hear,
where's
who's
Kristen?
in the audience?
Great. Great, Kristen. For the past 14 years, he has lived in rural southeast Ohio with his family. So thank you for coming all this way, Matt.
Not Iowa, it's Ohio.
Ohio.
Everyone's like, what do you live in Iowa?
No, Ohio.
It's Ohio.
Oh, it's not Ohio?
Yeah.
No. However, his work gets out.
It's rural.
It's rural. It's quite rural.
It's beautiful.
It's very beautiful. His work goes further afield than Ohio, as far afield as Japan and Denmark and Turkey and Paris and London and Pacific Palisades, places like that. In late 2022, the Toledo Museum of Art in Ohio presented a major survey exhibition of his work, which was seen through the first quarter of this year. And recently, Matt was a resident at the Honolulu Museum of Art, and we are actually the beneficiaries of the inspiration from that time with the work to the left here. So this is Matt's sixth solo show, although he's had numerous group show and Skyroom presentations. We first started showing his work in 2010, but this is the first solo show of his paintings. So there is a lot to discover this evening, and with that, I will hand the floor over to Shana. Thank you. A big round, please.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I love being here. I love the work. I'm really excited to kind of just like, I want to talk about like 5 different things all at the same time, and that's not possible. So we're gonna have to
That's
pick
how
a...
my brain works?
Same. Sorry, that's what we're gonna do. I mean,
So
honestly,
okay.
I wish we could do everything all at once, because
Yeah.
I feel like you could start in so many different places with this work, with the conversation, with your vision overall, with the experience of it all. I think maybe the best thing to do is to just sort of say like what we're looking at, like this is work that I made at this time, in this place, in this setting. And then we can kind of back up and get ahead of some of what I'm sure the folks in the audience are going to want to know more about. How about that?
All right.
Cool.
So a couple of shows ago, I had a series of works where my clay became less like clay. It was just a color, or there was a shift in my perception about how I interpreted what the clay was. It kind of, I realized that I was just squishing color. It wasn't just, I was able to disconnect from the craft language that I grew up in, as a son of a potter, rooted in vessel history, and that framed my
tactility and the weight.
Well, that framed my perspective of art history, and my perspective of the medium was me rooted within ceramic history. But then, as I worked with it, there was this point where it just became color and sculpting, and then I realized that this is painting, this is sculpting. The whole concept just kind of unraveled emotionally for me, as a way for me to evolve as a maker. And then just the next step of that was just trying to test that out, to try to see if I was a painter, and to realize this apprehension that I had with color, because it didn't melt, it didn't change, and so like the self stayed present. And so that's pretty intimidating as a ceramic artist, where you kind of almost you allow this thing to take place that becomes your work. So there's the stakes seemed high in terms of my identity, because I couldn't rely on it anymore. So there was this hesitation
part where you can say something very poetic and engaging about how, the elements of chance, or, something happens in the fire, and maybe you don't know exactly what's going to result, but with here, it's like it's in front of you.
Well, like when I work on clay, I work the same way with the paintings, but it's about kind of like there's a form that is communicating color to me. So it's a form of listening, and a form, in trying to figure out the context at which listening can take place. And that's different for everybody. And so for me, generally, it's in solace, and I need quiet. I need access to myself, and only then, I start seeing things. I can feel. I'm a tremendously emotional and sensitive person. So right now I have this whole flush of energy in this part of my body, and I can feel it. It has color, and so my forms have that sense. They offer a suggestion of this is active, and by placing color, it's a way of acknowledging my own state of self, right? And because that's all I have to go on, and then that kind of leads to the next, and then helps me work through my own kind of cognition as a way of that's how the color kind of emerges. But within clay, it's a fictional image, because I'm painting a red, but it's all in grayscale, so pretty much, there's some hues, but when I shift it, if I have a color and then I start adding darkness to it and gradations, I can't tell visually. So it's a fictional image that I'm constructing as I'm painting this. So it's all about memory, and this object kind of emerges in my imagination of what it is. And then I put that over to this kiln environment, which becomes this liquid space. Like the carbon and the oxygen are in this liquid state. They're kind of merging in and out of each other. The glaze is this open state where the kind of atmosphere is kind of liquid between the glaze. And it's just so rich and beautiful. And one of the reasons why I do all of my work and fire my work, and I need that space, because it's in those moments where I harvest images from, being next to heat at 3 a.m, this 2,000 degrees in my backyard, this kind of strange space where everything is up to me. The firing sequence is also liquid because it's emotional. I lose track, and then the firing, that changes the firing. So my own kind of cognition is this kind of liquid state that kind of where the work, that forms the work. So it's very, so if I put it into electric kiln, then it's just it's a different thing. It has a different energy than if I lose track, or my kids come in and I need to make, and all of a sudden I need to stop, and then I get distracted, and then I'm like, oh my God, I fire my kiln. I'm firing a kiln, oh my God. And then I run outside. Like that suspension, that abnormal suspension creates this broader language within the work that I notice tremendously, and that the work notices. So
at the end of that, the relationship
So then you
between...
have this fictional image that then you have to reconcile with, and let go of. At the end of every firing, I let go of it. No expectation of it. And that's the only way that I can approach the kiln without fear or trauma, because like things can explode and tear themselves apart, and everything, all of your longing can be taken away from you. And that's difficult. So for me, like every time I turn off a kiln, it's kind of this letting go of the fiction, of the image that I'd constructed, and an acceptance of what will emerge. So with the paintings, it's different because that it's not a fictional image, and it doesn't go through that state. So like it almost allows me to peer into my mind differently than my ceramic work because I can see it. I can see the image. It's not fictional anymore.
There's no more of that sort of probability. It's finite. It's in front of you. You're right. Like your intention and the result have a much more direct relationship to each other than with the intervention of this room of
immediate.
Liquid fire. Right.
Yeah, it's present self. Yeah. Which is
why is that part of why you? In other words, which came first? Like, is knowing that you needed to spend some quiet time with this new part of your brain and your creativity, why you sought out a residency remote from home in such a different climate, or did you get the residency and think, I'll draw there?
It was not quiet. I brought my kids.
Okay,
so like
there's the chaos. You left the kiln, but you brought another kind of chaos.
One of the components, of like living in the rural country is we have this kind of peculiar kind of relationship, where I'm their teacher. Like they ask you if I teach, and it's like I'm their teacher. It's like unpaid teaching, right? But that's what I do, and balance kind of just this attempt at reclaiming my own self as a father and my own reconciling that work that I'm trying to do in terms of our own, in terms of evolution of self. And just the directness of trying to help them navigate and evolve as beings, And so my work and their work is intertwined. So with the residency in Honolulu, it was kind of like they became with me. And it was about their growth and my growth kind of simultaneously. Because it was kind of like I would never go to a residency because I have two kids. I can't leave them. So it was kind of like if they can come, then I can do it. So we kind of just did what we did at home, but there, and they did their work, and I did mine.
But did you know going into it that it was going to be a painting residency, or? It
was all stuff. Yeah, it was sculpture and painting, and we did this collaborative project with the community where I made this giant object for them to decorate, ornament with flowers. And I was looking at it and looking at mine and realizing that all of my flowers are, like especially these ones. These happened right before the residency. It's the same kind of composition, right? And then in this group project, it was just chaos, and like it was this interweaving structure. So I think for me, I use color to create momentum around the work, and this like liquid or a current. There's a current language. It's a motive current. So there's a series of works where the flowers started to get softer, and some started to be at different states of growth. So I made that series of ceramic work, like 9 pieces in this like intense period, and did these paintings. And so I think for me, the shift with the paintings that happened was I started seeing, my daughter and I work on seeing images in the world, not projecting images.
But paying attention.
Just observing and recording images that one sees in the world. And then how do you use that as a listening device and a capturing device of those things seen. And so as I started to paint and create these paintings that were influenced by the kind of gardens in that area, the color platform, the color plane was a space at which I would just wait until images would emerge, you know, and kind of not glaze them, but paint them the similar way that I would paint the clay work in terms of listening to emotion, dictating color, but then slowly allowing and going slower. With these pieces in here, they were a lot slower than these other ones, and in waiting until like the landscape that I'd drawn from starts to break down and an image on top of it starting to emerge out of it. And I think so they're in the beginning of this thing where it's starting to kind of, these two layers on top of each other, two image layers on top of each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that actually, it brings me to one of my favorite points about you and your work, and I think this came up in like an interview that I did with you for like, I want to say Art Limited, like 1,000 years ago,
gosh.
right? Remember?
Yeah.
But like the idea was like, one of the things that captivated me always about the sculptures, the botanical ones especially, is that as strange as they look, you know, as unfamiliar, as extraterrestrials, as whatever, as they look, the reality is that in this part of the world, in the desert, say, well, all over the world, there are plants that kind of look like that.
Right.
And that what people don't often, you know, you don't often in the moment when you're just on this earth in some kind of garden stop to think that plant is insane looking and has no business being, so that your work, right? And so that's the reality that we live in. That's the world we live in. So you don't have to invent flora and botanicals that look like this. They're out there if you go through the world listening and paying attention. And so I think about the desert a lot when I see work like you have that I'm looking at there on the sky, in the sky room, because you know, it has a succulent quality to it,
Right.
and sort of okay. But then I look at something like this and I think about the sort of tropical version of that, the really lush,
Right.
fecund, botanical, the insane colors you didn't think were found in nature, and then suddenly they're all around you. That experience of that kind of landscape. And so I always love to remind myself that you are in nature. No matter how strange the work may come out by the time you're done dealing with it, this is all from the world that we live in.
Yeah. A lot of my work is about like cognition, self, in an ecosystem, in the awareness of self and ecosystem. And so nature, or like nature, what does that mean? You know, this is nature. Our oxygen, this, you know, it's all nature, but like, that's some.
It's real hard to resist.
I can't beatbox, sorry. Yeah, I shouldn't have either. Well, we can just keep going.
Just try to ignore it and talk real loud like that.
There we go. Okay. So
you were talking about the world around you influencing.
The piece on the wall behind us, they're the potted plant series. So that was for me trying to figure out who I was as a painter. There's also these just origin forms of like, thinking about my mother who's a gardener, and how just that was rooted into my own kind of concept of caretaking within our family and the work that she does as a caretaker and in the world, and has done with me in terms of like teaching me sensitivity of touch, and how touch can have healing properties in it. You know, that's radical. Radical caretaking work, and has influenced my practice and my emotions and my vulnerability and sensitivity and everything. So for me, like that, the plant forms and me trying to explore my own sense as a painter kind of went back to like my influence of vessel history and ceramic history that I kind of materially grew out of, but then also my relationship to caretaking structures. And so for these ones, they're kind of, it's just me intuition, my own intuition, the leaves kind of mimic, in a way, the cylinder structures that were growing at the time in my work. There was some kind of like stem
scaled,
stock
stacking
structures.
Stem, yeah.
And they had kind of similar movement, but the paintings allowed me not to worry about gravity, because in clay, everything's slow, and
And if you try to do something thin and delicate.
So they allow me to
Yes.
break that and explore those two parts of my own identity.
I like to think of them as the vessels and being the history of pots, aka your father, and the botanicals being from the garden, which, as you spoke about, you think about your mother. And maybe it's just because there's this storyteller in me, the writer, but I feel like if you know that little sort of like, it's not a secret, but if you can unlock like that little bit about this, the imagery in them, and you think about that really ties into the ways in which these are autobiographical and self-investigatory for you.
Right.
That manifests outward in the sort of motif.
And how the color also is. It's simultaneously. It's a listening, an allowance of self to take place, unvarnished, because that's all we have to go on,
And as far as the colors, so
it's about building maybe a trust that language has meaning, that has value as a guide, as this kind of, I think a lot of my work recently is this cognitive device. The petal forms, at one point they became this kind of imprisonment in which my body longed to break out of this repetition. And then it finally did, and it became just this ripping itself out, and then it turned into a drapery and accumulation and the awareness of self, which turned into abstraction, and which images emerged out of. And so like this whole series of work kind of took place over 15 years, in which I kind of was trying to, like, tearing myself apart and looking in the inside and trying to just explore consciousness and self and space. And then I kind of found myself returning to these. These pieces are the first flower tree pieces that I did after going into abstraction, and trying to realize that I needed them, or once I started making them again, I realized all of the original arguments that were so beautiful that I had argued against and unraveled were still inherent. And then in the imprisonment structure became a state of meditation. It wasn't imprisonment anymore. It was this place of healing. It was a healing device at which the petals, the slowness, it's like, roll, roll, pinch, 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 stick. Roll, roll, pinch, 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 stick. And so it slows down time, and that kind of repetition became a plane of harvesting. Like, I could do all that work that I was doing explorationally within my sculpture, but cognitively, and allowing kind of like a space where it was more about kind of healing and growth than it was about tearing apart. And so then the flowering structures became about like this healing device for me, my own self, which became, about, that's what it's all about. It's a cognitive device. Our practices, our pursuits in the world are our own kind of like manifestation of self, and searching and exploration and just embodiment. And all the just beautiful components of life that you want to convey and advocate for in people's lives.
I love that so much. And I think what's amazing about hearing you speak like this is I think that those are the kinds of journeys that your work takes audiences on. And what you're doing right now is so generous, because it's like you're giving us all permission to go, yeah, you are feeling that. Like, that is in the work. If this color is making you feel a way, or triggering a set of emotions, or giving you some kind of Proustian thing that's taking you out of the moment and whatever, like, yeah, that's all in there. You put all that in there. For yourself. And I think one of the things we've been talking about is this idea of the quality of attention, and how what you describe just now as that kind of meditative flow that you got back into once you had surrendered to the necessity of the flowers in the clay studio, is I feel like these reflect something like that. I imagine you in that far away sort of paradise environment of Honolulu, and absorbing the energy sort of straight out of the incredible botanical and ecological and energetic situation, and the supercharged energy on those islands themselves. So you're somebody who sat there and definitely was in communication with that as you were working.
Right.
And so, but my question is, like, how then, this is going to like bring it way back, and it'll be a little bit mundane, but I do want to ask then, how do you know when these are done, right? Because there isn't a moment, like you were talking about how you work, there isn't a moment where you have done all you can and now the fire is going to do the rest, and let's see what's coming. These are like, you have to take full responsibility for what it means, that it says exactly what you mean in the moment, and there's no elemental force of nature coming to intervene. So how do you relate to it differently, knowing that that's what's happening when you paint?
I think there's a consistency in that, like the mark making it's a single gesture. Like it's not an edited gesture. It's like a vulnerability state that's allowed, and I have to reconcile with that. You know, whether it's on the clay work, because I only fire once, it's not a refired until it's this concept of perfection. There's vulnerability inherent, you know, and because it's a searching, it's all the, you know, it's the allowance of body and what's known and not known to take place, and it's more of a clear portrait of like who I am. So I think with the color, it's similar in that it's not painted over painted. It's just like each brush stroke is a decision, let be, that then leads to the next. And then, so in a way, the paintings are similar in terms of the moment the color's in, then, okay, this is where I am cognitively, and how does this inform the longing and progression forward, and how is this different optically or visually or referentially, like to what I've done in the past. And I think the biggest, most radical thing for me is that I told myself this linear narrative for a long time, and there was this point at which I stopped being able to hold the whole narrative together. You know, it was almost like this longing to kind of let go of the narrative so that I could be freed from it. But there was this, I think the moment I went back and did the flower tree pieces, and recently I explored this body of work, which is very different from the work in Honolulu again. And it was this realization that like there's no linear narrative there. It's just all of this kind of universal spectrum. I stopped because I ran out of resources. You know, I stopped that body of work because I ran out of clay, you know, or you know, really just fundamental things where I couldn't anymore. And then I turn around and try to manifest a different sense of myself with what I had available to me, right? But so the idea that like there's no linear narrative where I can't go back, it's just they're all taking place simultaneously, that if I can find the entry point into them again, the kind of the exploration is just as clear. So that just gave me so much excitement moving forward, that all of these bodies of work are not finished. I mean, not they're finished, but like they're still in this kind of like cognitive state of kind of growth and evolution, whether it be the abstracted work at which images emerge from, or these kind of like more cropped pieces which broke outside of the potted plant structure and became more like fields, more like these started to become less like fruit and more like blood cells, like floating as I kept painting them. And then it became like, oh my God, about synapses and how the brain works and how my brain is like telling me image, you know, colorations, and it became more of this liquid kind of emotional, the way cognition takes place, you know, is just unfolding in a field, in a.
Well, I think it's amazing how, especially, you know, the ones that really mess with, you know, with your optical experience, like these. But even the ones that are a little bit more reserved, that there is a sense of movement in the work, not only because your eye kind of follows, kind of like almost like, you know, chutes and ladders or whatever. It follows the lines, the curves of the pieces of botany that sometimes resemble a little bit of a cheeky human anatomy here and there. So you have these moments where they're sort of charming and sort of funny, and then other ones where you get really lost in them. And in other words, I think if you just have this experience of what your eye does with this work, that it does remind me of what your body does when you encounter your sculptures. You know, you have to go in and through and around, and there's kind of like passageways and details, you know, behind, and your eye is in constant motion. You don't see one of your sculptures and see it as an image, right? You have to deal with all of the movement of it. And I feel like there's some of that same kind of energetic engagement with these as well, but I think like what I'm really obsessed with too, though, is the color, is the palette, because I feel like there's an expanded palette in the paintings that you could have been doing in sculptures all along, but haven't been. And so I really want to know what that's about, please.
Yes, the earlier works were very much, like the piece downstairs is like reds and bright reds and yellows, right? And my work shift in terms of, there was this point at which I started like wanting to push them into this, fire them higher to see if they could withstand this kind of intensity. And for me, just as like in terms of the history of craft and ceramics, like I was curious about this work being in a glass state. And just in a liquid state, you know, because when glass, when it melts, there is a softening that takes place at a certain temperature. And so that kind of curiosity just opened up maybe a different palette, and an interest recently in working, like simplifying the glazes in a way where I had like 4 different colors that I could spend, you know, 30 years understanding or more, you know. That's been kind of like shift in in the way I treat the material, rather than each gesture being this new argument with the past material or kind of ceramic history, rather than ceramic history being this just beautiful, rich space that could influence at any moment and argue with itself amongst the kind of the palette of my work. There's been a simplification recently to just want to learn, you know. I think there's like two different glazes. But there's just infinite complexity behind them, and just as a research study, as a cognitive study for my own self as a human, like in wanting to just spend time with a few things instead of like.
But where did all this color come from then? Surely not
just realizing how I loved color, just in breaking away of this fear concept of like, no, you're not a painter, you're not trained, you're, you know. And just feeling like, oh my gosh, this color is as delicious as this feeling of this kind of cream cheese consistency, clay squishing. You know. So there's this expansiveness, like delight, longing, celebration, just maybe, and this will start influencing my clay work tremendously. In terms of as I start to understand these few glazes and can kind of like control them, you know, that just gets more and more, more like painting. I remember, I just love the texture of painting so much. These don't have much texture in them, but in terms of how that influences my clay work, I'm not sure. I think one of the things that living rurally, or living in Ohio, or we're on our property, during the pandemic, I was in this kind of state of pain for like 6 months. It was crazy. This back pain thing. And I remember like, I was in my hot tub, which is like, thank goodness. My neighbors gave us their hot tub and whatever. It's a long story. But the field, as I would sit there at like 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning, I was like looking at the silhouette on my field, and it was this like, the silhouette of the trees it was this lying figure, and it was kind of bundled, and just the silhouette became an image. That it was bundled image looking up at the stars, right? But that was me. I was in this state of longing or searching for reference points to withstand this kind of challenge in my life, and an image came as a reference point as like a consolation or a reference point, a guide for my own like growth, the thing that I needed. Like so okay, this image communicated to me and gave me power, like a strength and reference point to grow from. Or like if I look into the field, and then I remember being in this like lake and just wishing I could be in the studio. And then all of a sudden these images started to emerge in the silhouettes of the trees, and they became all of mythology started to emerge in front of me, right? In this breakdown of like, oh, I don't need to be in the studio right now, like it's right here, right? And those images aren't just random, they're in reference to your own navigation, you know, as a person. And so there's relevance in those as guides or reference point, right? So for me, the shift has been about allowing those images to emerge. And also when I live with my work, in the periphery, images emerge in my work that are in reference to where the challenges that I'm navigating, grief or all the work and evolution we try to do is in our bodies, in our minds, in a daily basis. There's guides around us. So for me, I think a lot of these, even looking at them now, is like there's images starting to emerge in them for me. And I just see that as like a new kind of subject matter that's taking place in my practice, whether that be here, within that blue plane, whether or not they be faces or who knows. Those are shaping my work tremendously these days. Because what is it? It's like, why do we see images? That's the origin of kind of mythology and just, wow, being in a vulnerable state and all of a sudden seeing an image in the world that you have to contend with.
And then with that moment too,
that's power.
And as you evolve to start recognizing them and seeing them and, the sort of the phenomenon of seeing faces in, rocks and trees and all of that. And there's a name for it,
right? But like the moment you put a name on it, it's as if it's like simple. It's as if it's like categorized and referential and just like, okay, we figured out what it is. No more to look here.
Yeah.
And that's where I get really frustrated about that kind of the classification of that, because it has power in our bodies that is, if anyone's been in a hospital or in a state of grief or trauma or longing for just reference point, those images can give you guidance. Yeah. They give me guidance.
No, I agree.
And that gives healing. That allows your body in your stomach to be at ease. That allows clarity or reference points that you forgot about that you can connect. And like there's healing power for me in those things. And I think a lot of my work is structured around that as a caretaking as a cognitive device, as a pursuit, and how in a place of to harvest images from, to allow oneself to grow in one's own life, to kind of take that language that you kind of compile to become, to change how you interact with the community and your loved ones and the things you long to do in the world, in the planet.
I think that, hearing you say that is only surprising in the context of the kinds of things that most people say at conventional, artist talks, right? Oh, no. And so, but I think the actual truth is that it's going to be extremely resonant with the people in here, because I think that the people who respond to your work, like I do, who are fans of the work and who love these paintings, that what you just said is the thing that they're responding to ultimately in the work. That energy of caretaking and creativity and attention and ecology is exactly not only working on you as a human in the studio when you're working, but I think that's what's affecting the people when they engage with the work as well. I think that's what people who love it feel.
Because it's memory of that pursuit. It's a memory. It's memory of that work taking place. I think all art, music, and everything. It's just, the kind of the record of that. Can be sometimes be memory that we need. To pursue our own work. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. God, I'm obsessed. I could do this all night. Matt, I can't tell you, thank you. That was so beautiful, really. I'm so glad we're taping it. I'm having this conversation with you and I want to listen to it again and again and again, right? So, thank you. First of all, we've been talking for way longer than we said we would, which is only to be expected because, as I mentioned, that was really emotional and really beautiful. But I would also like to make sure that we leave time for some questions from the audience.
Sounds good.
Is that good? Are you ready for that now?
Yeah. This is
Okay.
my emotional support animal. This is my daughter's. Eleanor, one of her creatures of the wind, that she calls them.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm glad. Does it have a name?
I think she wrote it on here. Robin. This is Robin.
Robin. Well, thank you for your help, Robin. You did a great job. Matt's fine. Amazing. Okay, Mimi with the microphone. See, I remembered. We weren't sure, but I did. Who has questions for Matt?
I'm glad to hear you. My son was a student of yours at UC Long Beach. Daniel Hellman.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Anyways, he's also into sustainability and mind things. But I have a question. As a ceramicist, have you ever tasted clay, or do you have any special taste for clay?
I mean, when you're in the studio, you mix glazes and there's a smell to them. You know, when they're the salts or the sodiums they all have different, it's the consistency of a milkshake, basically.
Yes.
And the color is delicious, So like there's moments where I haven't, it's right there. The decision that you could, it's just like you want to. Which led to a whole body of work where I was just wanting to just dip my hand in this material and, this dimensional exploration of color. And so there is a tactile kind of palette, taste, language that I just, that's so delicious. Like this new glazes that I have, they're the consistency of silk. So it's like I'm exploring my own consciousness, but my hands, it feels like silk. So that creates this like quivering relationship to this sensibility to material that affects my emotions, and my vulnerability, that where images emerge and where color emerges. And so like there is a crossover between the kind of the mineral nature and how that affects cognition.
No, there are clay eaters, and they have a deficiency, and there are different ways of approaching clay.
Right.
So.
I think I ingested in other manners, in other matter, and like just through the proximity, But I think it's interesting how minerals changes our minds. It gives our body's relationship to mineral. You change that, and it changes perception, I think.
Yeah, and there's a world.
And so that's amazing. So then you can change that.
Right,
and
color is a part of that as well. Like, in other words, it's not just the elemental sort of like responding to whatever composition of minerals is in your blood, maybe talking to whatever, but like that there's also that world of that the differences between mineral elements manifest in color.
Right.
As well.
Sure.
Right? They don't all just look like rocks, but do different things, right? They have this incredible kaleidoscopic spectrum of minerals and gems in the world that, and then that affects people's mood and emotion as well. And so it sounds interesting to talk about like minerals and cognition, but if you really like think about it for a second, what you're saying makes perfect sense because they all exist in that wheel together.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's just awareness of matter,
right?
Like in the earth is all of the colors of the earth, like, oh my God, there's in New York, the gallery there, just like they have every mineral. Where's the big museum in New York City? In New York City?
Well, there's the Natural History Museum. By the way, the one here of Los Angeles County just opened like some crazy centennial gem collection of the world kind of exhibition like a week ago. I don't know when you're going home, but
oh my God.
FYI. You might want to hit that. See if you have some time tomorrow.
And like a kiln furnace is like, it's just, you can create those same similar environments at which kind of phenomena emerge from. So then it's about exploration of just self in reality, physics and matter and just awareness and pursuit, and then cognition. I mean, it's all overlapping in the foundation of what I explore in my practice.
Yeah, I mean, sitting in this room looking at them, I feel like it makes sense. Like, I feel like what's interesting is I'm seeing all those kind of more esoteric ideas, but I feel like I see them at home in these images. Right. Even in almost maybe a little bit more directly in some ways than in the ceramics, because I'm dealing with those as objects, but I'm in a two-dimensional place like a painting, able to kind of give it an informational dimension as well. Like, in other words, I'm looking at it and I'm aware that it's an image. It's not an illusionistic painting. So I'm looking at a painting. When I'm looking at one of the flower trees, there's part of your brain that feels like it's looking at a flower tree, right? Like, that's where the play comes in. But when you're looking at these, you're looking at a depiction, and so you're already kind of engaging with what was going on with the artist in that moment. So I think there's a way in which, oddly, these have a more, I don't even know if it's that odd, but that these have a more direct relationship to these ideas about cognition and emotion and story. It's much more clear that might be what we're dealing with. And of course, in the history of botanical still lifes, they were all encoded with narratives and messages and meanings and emotions, and each flower meant something and their proximities meant something. And I feel like, that's all in this work as well, for me anyway.
The challenge for me is that it's like I've always struggled with language and have been in a state of like communication through touch, through energy, like has been the closest kind of way that I can communicate with people. And so for me, I think there's a strong longing to wish I was, more analytical and structured and kind of like everything is there, planned out. No, this is like, it's kind of a plane where I allow myself to communicate and listen. And it's the closest kind of communication device that I have. And it's so much of it's nonverbal, even to me, but it's known. It's like an active knowing of, in presence.
Active knowing. I love that so much. Let me write that down. That's good. There is something really, really physical about the way that you engage with the work, even though it's beautiful. And I think too that the way you apply the paint makes me think about the artist at work, like I see your hand in it, and that's what that's for. And so I feel like there's still your presence in it, even though it's not, you don't think of the hand as much as you do when you can physically see where your hand was in the clay. And you're imagining your own hand in the clay. That's what happens. I love it when they put stuff out there, because then I kind of feel like you're allowed to touch it if it's outside. I mean, they left it outside. Surely it's okay if I touch it, right? Anyway, the point is, I love work with a little bit of ability to experience that tactility. And I'm a fan of the degree to which you've managed to maintain the energy of that in two dimensions, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
They're gorgeous. Yes.
So, do I have to?
Me with the mic. See, I remembered before. And then I forgot.
I know you'll hear me.
Here she comes.
So, you talked earlier about your daughter. I think you brought your kids with you to Hawaii, and you said something about taking a walk with her and paying attention when you walk with her, just both of you engaging and paying attention. Can you kind of describe a moment or an afternoon or a walk where how that feels or looks? Or
I mean, the only first image is like there was this plant form that it was just as animal as it was plant. It was hairy, and it was fuzzy, and it was cute. It was adorable. So we were just suspended on our walk. Usually when we're walking, we're pretty slow. we could be content in this pretty short, small environment and see a lot, and then just everything slows down. But just this plant, so we just would put our hand on it and be like, oh, what a just adorable thing, like, hello. Because we have a dog, we were missing our dog at the time, so it was just like, oh, you're so cute, like, oh. And so this breakdown between, plant and animal and, the other thing is like, oh my God, I was in the studio working, and she came in and was like, Dad, I saw this tree, I saw this image in the tree. There's a person in the tree. And so I went out, I stopped what I'm doing, like, okay. Stop what I'm doing, because you're, in our pursuits, there's that constant navigation with what our serious pursuit is, right? But every time I stop, I realize everything what she's showing me has more relevance than the things that I am trying to pursue myself. So I went out and saw this tree that she was talking about, and there was this being in the tree, There was this protector, it was a guardian, emerged out of this palm tree, and the palm fronds draped over its face, and it was looking out over the building. And it was realistic, as real as day. I have a picture of it. I'll post it on it. But, and just by looking, she had created this, like, powerful being, just by being present, And it was just, that was the most radical form of sculpture that I'd ever seen, where just by being curious and looking and observing, she manifested something that had more power over the community, and everybody who came by it was just like, oh my gosh, that we have this guardian now over this kind of educational space, Whoa. I mean, that's radical. That's power, like, that's where true, so like kind of reconciling what is true creativity, like what am I trying to grow into in terms of my awareness. And so for me, like being able to take time away from myself usually gives me reference points to grow, stronger as a maker, or as a looker, observer. So I think I'm really lucky to have both, to try to have a practice at which it's not that there's guidance from fallibility. There's guidance from being taken away from pursuit. There's that the work isn't only inside the studio. That my gardening teaches me about pain and fallibility and labor and kind of all of this delicious kind of metaphor inherent in that influences my practice, and my practice influences my work as a parent and my gardening and the work with trees, because then you can slow down time in the hope of that, like these trees that I'm trying to grow sideways as far as I can, and it's like, and then creating these moments where it's like, okay, this is an experiment into 50 years in the future, so there's this like reframe of fallibility and hope, that you're creating this kind of structure for the future to grow into, and these are the two things maybe that I think of.
Well, no, I think it's beautiful, and the paintings in the garden, and I mean, and that's what art history is, right? It's sort of, it's for now, it's also for the future. It's what parenting is, especially the way you've described it. I mean, I think what has emerged tonight is the truth of what you say, that every single level of these activities are all completely connected, that it's a completely holistic situation for you. The life, the art, the cognition, the self, the family, the parenting, the planet, that it's history, that it's there.
It's a place where images can emerge so you can grow,
Yeah.
And we're all trying to grow and contend and heal and make change and kind of participate in this world and, correct, things for the better. And we need images, new images for that work. And so how do you find context to kind of harvest that language so you can kind of hold yourself different, more like you long to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you both very much. That was a wonderful note to end on. So.
I got a little emotional, so
That's good. I wanted to let everybody know that the exhibition continues until January 6th. We will be open next week, Tuesday through Friday, and I will also be in the gallery with a couple of my colleagues on the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday between Christmas and New Year. So please come on by. It's going to be kind of fun during that time. And then, of course, the first week of January as well. So please come back again. Thank you all for joining us.